Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick, and it's time for today's camp notes for August 1st, 2024. At a high level, the practice was in pads again. Very hot day. One field of 11 on 11 only. So there's some things done to minimize practice time in the heat today. It was probably in the mid-90s by the time practice was over. But they did the first 30 minutes or so, 20 to 30 minutes of special teams practice indoors. So a lot of the reporting staff just stayed in the reporter's room until then, and left for the field at that point. In terms of absentees, Keaton Mitchell, TJ Tampa are still both on PUP. Adisa Isaac on NFI. Trayvon Mullen hurt the other day. I have not heard a report on exactly what's wrong with him. Malik Ham was moved to IR several days ago, so that's believed to be season ending. And Deontay Hardy it was not at practice again today, so not sure exactly when what the prognosis is for him at this point. However, there were a number of players who returned over the last 2 days, including Evans, Joe Evans, a linebacker, Evandy Rigby, who's an inside linebacker, who'd missed 8 consecutive practices. I don't know whether he returned actually on Wednesday or today on Thursday, but he was back today. Anyway, let's see who else was back. Rashad Nichols was cut and with an injury settlement, and unfortunately, that's a guy who had a pretty good chance to be the Ravens' 6th offensive lineman, which probably would have meant top of the practice squad. Anyway, he's gone now. And I'll try to see who else was back today. Some receivers are back. Rashad Bateman was back one of the last 2 days. I'm not sure which. And Devontae Walker was back as well. So honestly, pretty healthy in terms of people being there and in pads today. Relative to how they had been about the last week. During practice, Ben Cleveland went down with a concussion or a possible concussion. He'll be evaluated later today, I was told, or Harbaugh mentioned at the interviews. And that obviously is not good with that first preseason game coming up, and him being one of the players who, valuable playing time will accrue to potentially. The defense was back to its dominant practice score win with a 12 to 14 point win. I didn't see the actual score at the close there, but they were up, 51-37, 53-39 sort of thing towards the end of practice. And, the offense had its moments today, but there were more defensive highlights than offensive highlights for sure. We'll go through this in a little bit of a different way today, and it'll be hopefully a little quicker. We'll be a faster pod, and hopefully get a few more people involved in listening to it. But started with individual receiver versus DB drills. Now, these happen every day. It's not like I report on them every day, but I happen to be on that side of the field. And I'll say Arthur Mollett had a pass defense in coverage of Malik Cunningham. Dayton Wade beat Bump Cooper up the seam for a 40-yard catch, so that was nice. JAD covered Tylan Wallace step for step with a catch ruled out of bounds, so nice play by JAD to guard the sideline that way. Keith Kirkwood juke past Kadar Holman for a 30-yard catch. Now, Kadar Holman he's had some positive moments certainly this camp, but I would say his roster spot is probably in some significant jeopardy at this point. But Keith Kirkwood, probably also a guy who will not make the team, is my guess. Might have potentially have a spot on the practice squad. Even that seems maybe a little unlikely. But anyway, in this play, beat Kadar Holman pretty badly for a 30-yard catch. Ardarius Washington had a PD, not really nice one at the catch point versus Malik Cunningham. Now, Malik Cunningham's bigger than him, so is almost everybody on the field. But for him to go up at the catch point and disrupt the ball is nice. Isaiah Washington beat Christian Matthew deep 35 yards down the right sideline for a touchdown. Kind of blew right by him. Ball was dropped in nicely, and that was that. Sanusi Kane, we're going to hear from his name a couple of times today, had nice step-for-step coverage of Scotty Washington, 20 yards down the left sideline. This was Kane's biggest day of camp to date. He would add on an interception, another pass defense later in the day in 11 on 11, and might have been 1 on 7 and 7 too, but we'll talk to them when they come. The other drill going on at the same time, and so I just kind of half an eye on both, is the inside linebacker and running back drills. Now, I always love to watch those. I particularly like the ones that are pass blocking simulation. I just caught one of those. Rasheen Ali briefly held off Roquan Smith as a pass rusher. Good anytime you could do that, of course. And then a few other the receiving ones I happened to catch. Derrick Henry beat Roquan Smith on a wheel route. Unfortunately, the ball was underthrown and hit Smith in the back, but it would have been a nice, kind of a breakaway reception. And hopefully we get a sense of some danger and maybe even a little speed that Derrick Henry can bring as a receiver to the field as well. We know he's a pretty darn good pass blocker, and that'll be something we hope can be converted into some extended play opportunities with Lamar, as well as just some schemed up plays to get him the football in space. Owen Wright blew by Deion Jennings for a 20-yard completion in the seam. Nice to see that. Owen Wright's been having a pretty good camp. I've seen good things from him as a pass blocker. I think he's in good shape to be at the top of the practice squad. Don't think he'll necessarily be one of the 3 running backs plus Patrick Ricard that they keep, but pretty good chance that he's the 4th running back. And I'm not counting Keaton Mitchell yet because he's probably not going to be available for a good portion of the season. And, if you're in that position, that guy will probably get some playing time and maybe even some carries. But, it's certainly running backs miss time. Top of the practice squad guys get elevated. The Ravens don't have anybody right now who I would say is ahead of him in terms of his running back standing. So, good chance that Owen Wright will see more of him at some point this year. Some other general notes about 11 on 11s. And I mentioned that Ben Cleveland leaving early, evaluated for concussion. Travis Jones beat Andrew Voorhees to sack Lamar on one of the first plays. Now, Andrew Voorhees has not had a lot of really bad plays this camp, and Harbaugh acknowledged that during the interview session, praised vociferously, effusively the play of Voorhees for this camp so far, but acknowledged that sack was on him. And there's also some questions about Voorhees and had he ever faced a rusher like either Pierce or Jones in his time in the Pac-12. He said, no, it's a step up in class. And I'm paraphrasing, what he said, because that's a horse racing term. I don't think he'd use that, but he thought it was a bigger guys than he had faced in college. And even though he played in a Power 5 conference. So interesting to see what they do with that. Looks to me like Voorhees has got the starting job, and we know Travis Jones is going to have a major role on this team. Just nice to see a high-end one-on-one play like that. Josh Johnson had good protection. Despite that, and he threw an interception to Malik Harrison, who appeared to be underneath in zone. He wasn't really close to the intended receiver. He leapt up and kind of speared the ball with both hands. It was nice, really nice play, obviously. It shows some of the value that Malik can bring you when he's in coverage on that part of the field. Now, I'm not going to tell you whether he dropped there or he started inside linebacker, but it was one of those two. And, his ability to potentially play either of those positions could really benefit the Ravens. So we'll see where he lines up during the preseason. We'll have more to tell you about along those lines as time moves on. Let's see. Odafe Oweh had a pressure on Lamar to force an incomplete pass. Then Lamar had an odd play where he and the receivers on the left side appeared to have a miscommunication about the play on which the ball was blown dead for delay of game. Not sure of the exact reasons for that, but there was somebody in my immediate vicinity at camp today who did have some strong thoughts on that, and I'm sure he's right, given his background. Kyle Van Noy beat Patrick McCary to force an intentional grounding play. Ardarius Washington and Daryl Worley converged for a pass defense on a 30-yard pass intended for Scotty Washington. Nice to see team defense whenever it's played. Those are a couple of guys playing safety in this particular case who converged on a 30-yard pass, and you like to see your safeties be able to cover half the field like that and stop the opposing offense. Jalen Armour-Davis had several good plays today. The first of them was step-for-step coverage of Bateman on a 25-yard overthrow down the right sideline. And, even on a play where he didn't necessarily find the football, he was right there in his hip pocket. And some of what JAD is, what's going to allow him to take the step forward that he really, Ravens fans really hope he does, will be an ability to find the football in the air. But just having step-for-step coverage is a great thing when you can do that as a starting point. But he's got to figure out how to either find that football in the air or find it at the point of the catch, which involves using the cues off those receivers. And he did a little bit of that later in the day that I want to get to. Before Blaine Cleveland left, he had a nice pull block to knock down David, not down, but to seal off David Ojabo to the outside. I guess it's kick out, technically would be the term you'd use in that situation, but very nice pull from that left guard spot to block Ojabo. David Ojabo and Tavius Robinson combined to flush Johnson on a kind of a dual pressure. That was nice. And Johnson started to run. The play was blown dead. So you might call it a sack. You might call it a scramble. I'm not sure which. They didn't really sack him, but they flushed him from the pocket, which is nice. And one of the highlights of the day, Kadir Ishmael pancaked David Ojabo as a pass blocker. Now, Kadir has been quite impressive in camp today. I think good hands, good body control, a little bit of box out ability. He's been now officially moved to tight end on the Ravens practice roster sheet that they hand out. He'd been that just started this week. He'd been with the wide receivers and listed with that group at least all the way up until now. He is one of the nice dark horses to make the team. To be one of the guys I'm really looking at in that first preseason game. For Kadir to make the team, it might mean Charlie Kolar has to go. It's not a super high likely thing, but it's a possibility. It's also a possibility Kadir is a guy they have at the top of the practice squad. If they do that, they risk losing him, but much as Travis Vokolek was lost last year, a guy that they came to like during camp as a sure-handed, large receiver. And Kadir, at 6'6", 232, he flattened David Ojabo. And that is something you don't see very often. In a lot of ways, Kadir is probably the highlight of the entire practice in terms of an individual play. I'd say that, even though there were a few long catches, interception by Harrison, this and that, that was probably the play a lot of people are going to take away from this practice. And it's kind of moving. Ojabo seemed to be trying to get past Kadir to the inside, with Kadir out at the tight end on that side and just wasn't able to do it. And eventually went to the ground with Kadir on top of him. Kadir's also been involved in some chippiness. I thought, once it was kind of retaliatory chippiness against Trenton Simpson, if I recall correctly, who's been very chippy this camp. He's been looking for action all camp. The guy really needs some live fire against an opponent to kind of sate his need for that for a while, as I'd put it. But anyway, nice to see Kadir making his best effort to make the Ravens roster this year, and hopefully the Ravens can figure out a way to keep him, because I think he might be a talent. To finish the first 11-on-11 session, the really unknown defensive lineman, C.J. Ravenall. Now, he went to Missouri Western State, and he had sacks on consecutive plays with Emory Jones at quarterback. Now, Emory Jones has not been a quick reader or anything, but Ravenall was in quickly both times, and the play was blown dead. It was pressure right up the middle, couldn't be dealt with, and really nice to see that, of course. Tylan Wallace caught a pass and this would be in the second 11-on-11 session. That's how I have it organized this time. We caught a pass between Marcus Williams and JAD for about 15 yards. It was pretty much in the middle of the field. Those two defenders collided, and Wallace then took off for the end zone. You see that occasionally happen in a real game. It's not just a matter of these two players letting up, although that might have played a part in it in this particular case. But oftentimes it happens in a real game. The players run into each other, sandwiching an offensive player, and both defenders.
Every year, data breaches are on the rise. In 2022, the number of victims shot up nearly 41.5% from the previous year. And your personal information is at risk. With hundreds of commercial databases ready to be hacked, and that number of victims, it keeps going up each year. Plus, the U.S. has another big data privacy problem. the people search sites. You guys have all seen these. These are websites that create detailed personal profiles on millions of Americans and then publish them online for anyone to see. Your address, your phone number, even family details are just a click away. But there's a way to protect yourself. Meet Incogni. Incogni reaches out to data brokers on your behalf, requests the removal of your personal data, and handles any objections they may have. This means less stress for you and more peace of mind. With Incogni, you can safeguard your information from cyber criminals who steal social security numbers and other sensitive personal data to commit identity theft. Imagine the relief of knowing that your personal data is no longer easy prey for hackers. Incogni also protects you from data brokers selling your information to companies to target vulnerable and disadvantaged groups, exposing you to even more discrimination. These lists with titles like Tough Start, Young Single Parents, Rural, and Barely Making It can harm you both online and offline. Don't let your personal data fall into the wrong hands. Take control with Incogni today. Visit incogni.com/filmstudy and safeguard your privacy now. It's time to reclaim your digital security. That's Incogni/filmstudy. INCOGNI.com/filmstudy. Incogni, your shield in a digital world.
Take the worst of it. And all of a sudden, you've got two bouncing defenders lying on the ground and a wide receiver running towards the end zone. So this was one of those. Brandon Stevens got flagged for DPI while covering Flowers. That was about 15 yards down the middle of the field as well. Flowers was crossing back towards the middle. It seemed like Stevens might have gotten grabby at that point, and the flag was thrown. Malik Harrison again is in on a play. Appeared to have a sack of Josh Johnson. He was in. It was from the middle of the field. I guess it could have been a stunt or it could have been a blitz from inside linebacker. But in either case, he appeared to have a sack of Johnson. It was not whistled dead. Johnson ended up throwing the football. Short pass, and it was, I believe, completed for about 10 yards, but it looked like it should have been a sack. Eddie Jackson had a sack of Johnson when he came unblocked off the offensive right side. So nice to see that, of course. And the defense, as I've mentioned on this show several times, is not letting up on the offense in any way, shape, or form in terms of the scheme, the number, or the complexity of their blitzes. So they're giving the offense a lot to try and figure out in terms of how they need to set up their blocking scheme and how they need to adjust on the fly, which I think is good. I think it's, the offense needs that test. They'll certainly get it in the first preseason game. And the stakes are a little higher in that game, not in terms of the outcome of the game, but in terms of having the player get injured, because your pass rushers at this part of camp at least are taking care of the quarterback and taking care not to hit the quarterback. But that will not be the case come next Thursday against the Eagles, and some impressive pass rush talent and defensive line talent that the Ravens will have to deal with. Sanusi Kane had a pass defense of Devin and Leary. This is in 7-on-7 on a pass intended for Riley Sharp. So that's the last. That's the last 11-11 play I have for you before we go to 7-on-7. A fair number of notes on that. Humphrey had step-for-step coverage of Flowers, 30 yards down the right sideline. Ball was slightly overthrown. Nice to see Humphrey using the sideline well, of course. Ardarius Washington had step-for-step coverage of Andrews, 35 yards down the right numbers, I would say, more or less, or maybe between the hash and right numbers. But the play had already been blown dead for a sack at that point. It might have been good for Washington that was happening. He was kind of getting handsy at the end of the play, but it's nice that the ball had been blown dead already. Then JAD had another PD in coverage of Sean Ryan. It was 25 yards down the left sideline. Again, using the boundary fairly well. In this case, he found the football, that's what we need to see from JAD, and that's a good sign. Bump Cooper came up to make a quick tackle on Collier, and Collier is the running back, so small school running back, number 38, who's probably last on the running back depth chart right now, but it wasn't helped by Leary, who threw a short swing pass to that side behind the line of scrimmage and very late. And Cooper came down and made the play. And again, it's a 7-on-7 drill. They have requirements on how long they have to wait until they go. But this was a case. If this were a real game, that pass was thrown as late as it would have resulted in the same play. Big tackle for loss on Collier or on some player. Eddie Jackson had good coverage of Mark Andrews, who leapt but could not reach an overthrow from Lamar Jackson. So Eddie Jackson did not have an interception on the play, but he looked good in coverage there. Bateman went down to dig out a 10-yard throw. That was between Stevens and Marcus Williams in coverage. So a good one there. We had Lamar overthrowing Bateman out of bounds on the next throw. Again, good coverage that time from Stevens and Williams. So the other time, Lamar put the ball in a kind of a protected spot where Bateman also had to go down and make a catch. The other one, he overthrew him on the sideline. You win some, you lose some. Then Humphrey had step-for-step coverage of Malik Cunningham on a 20-yard throw between the numbers and the left hash. And this is a place – Humphrey has just been on fire this camp. He's a bunch of interceptions, finding the football well, step-for-step coverage with very fast players. It's Humphrey is not the youngest player in the league anymore. I don't know if he's ever the youngest player in the league, but he's pretty damn close when he came out of Alabama and was getting a ton of snaps in his rookie season. But now he's still able to go step for step with some of these younger receivers. Is impressive. Eddie Jackson had a near interception of a Johnson pass that was overthrown. It was intended for Kadir Ishmael over the middle of the field. It was overthrown by several feet, and Jackson came over to the overthrow spot and appeared to get his hands on the ball, but just tipped it, couldn't quite haul it in. So that happens. Laps. I know you always want me reporting on the laps, guys. We had a false start and a lap from Tykeem Doss, and he would end up with 2 of those for the day. Not helping his cause there. Ronnie Stanley had a lap. We had a lap for a false start from Zay Flowers, and we had a lap for a false start from Malik Cunningham. And in fact, on one series, this was of 11 on 11s, we had Johnson in at quarterback. The first two plays are a false start by Doss and a false start by Cunningham. I don't know how much the quarterback is getting blamed for that, or if there's anything about the pace of play that was not up to snuff or whatever, but it did not, it doesn't look good, first of all, but even worse, it is a denying reps to receivers and the quarterback and the offensive line that really need it. So that was unfortunate. Interviews today, there was a few things that were said that were of interest. You get a lot of coach speak, and I always encourage people, just go listen to the interviews. They're out there. You don't need me to interpret them for you. They'll tell you a lot of what's going on. You'll hear some of my questions on there. From John Harbaugh, he was glowing about Andrew Voorhees, said some nice things about him while acknowledging that Voorhees had allowed the sack to Travis Jones, I think I said earlier. One of the things he said about Patrick McCary, who was at the podium after him, was that his versatility was maybe his biggest strength, but also a thorn in his side in terms of finding a permanent position. I paraphrased slightly in that regard, but I think he's correct that McCary has had trouble being a permanent player anyway because he's so valuable as a backup, and they really want him as insurance against anything that happens to Ronnie Stanley. It may be even this year that they'll want to, at some point, if not at the start of the season, have Roger Rosengarten, for example, be at right tackle. And we my feelings by now, no doubt, that they really need to find out who they have in Rosengarten during the 2024 season so they can figure out 2025 and beyond in terms of what they're going to do about Ronnie Stanley and his impending free agency. Justice Hill was next at the stand. I thought he said some interesting things. Talked about working on his game and his body more during the offseason. Talked about working on a lot of elements of his game. He mentioned pass blocking at that point. I was going to ask a question about pass blocking, but he also said that special teams helped him learn about playing better offense. I thought that was fascinating. So there's probably some things he's learning as a gunner or as a coverage guy about perhaps leverage in an opposing player that he can then translate into offense. And I'm this is conjecture, based on what he said, but I do believe him when he talks about that. And he's got a contract that there's a mix of his special teams value and his value as a running back. Had kind of a breakout year last year in terms of a good number of yards on the ground, a few more opportunities in terms of the passing game, a little bit better, I believe, yards per target last year, although still maybe not great. But he's a guy now who the team had appreciated having on the field on third down for the combination of his pass blocking and a little bit of receiving skills. So not to mention, the running he did during the season. So hopefully he has another good year this year. Had complimentary things to say about Derrick Henry. I don't need to tell you, there's nobody's going to have anything bad to say about Derrick Henry at this point. Boy, that guy sucks. I wish he wasn't in the locker room. Nobody's saying that right now. So take a look at what Hill had to say about Henry, and I think it's kind of interesting. Patrick Mekari talked about his newfound leadership role with the departures of Kevin Zeitler and Morgan Moses. So a couple of guys who were certifiably leaders and older players. The Ravens have gone to a much younger offensive line with the three new replacements in the form of Voorhees. They may have Josh Jones around, but probably only as a backup, and of course, the possibility of having Ben Cleveland at right guard, or perhaps Daniel Fa'alele, both young players, and then having potentially Roger Rosengarten at right tackle, competing with him for the spot. So, one question I thought was interesting that he was asked was, does he need reps at the other positions in order to maintain his value as a versatile offensive lineman who could move around? And he said, yes, he did need reps. He's played mostly tackle the last several years for the Ravens. So I would think at left tackle in particular, he probably needs some reps, and it's probably a good idea. It's something I would guess will happen maybe either during the preseason game, which might be a very good time, or if he's too valuable, which they may have decided already, then he'll probably get that in practice at some point, I would think. Andrew Voorhees, last to the podium. Lots of things he talked about. Talked about the difference between Pearson Jones and what he faced in the Pac-12. I believe I might mention that earlier. Had glowing remarks about the Ravens for taking a chance on him despite the injury. Of course, he's probably overstating that slightly because they didn't really take a chance on him in terms of NFIing him as opposed to IRing him. So he they did believe in him. They believed in buying into a year deferred from a knee injury, what he might still be. And they really believed in him based on the fact that they had 4 years of team control left and not 3, as they did, of course, with David Ojabo coming back from his NFI designation early. So reported by all other parties who have commented on it so far in camp, Mekari among them in today, that he had spent a lot of time in the classroom during 23 in the offensive line room, really understanding what was going on. So hopefully he got real value out of that time. And I think it's shown up so far in terms of what we've seen in camp. Voorhees is one of the players who I believe has won the job now at left guard. I don't think there's any doubt. So we'll see if the thing we should look for is that Voorhees plays left guard for maybe 1 to 2 series, whatever the other starters play, and then either leaves the game at that point or moves over to, say, play center. So then we might get an indication that Voorhees is a backup center option for the Ravens. I think either of those cases are fine. If he plays the entire first half and into the second half at left guard, or plays some combination of left guard and right guard, I don't think that's a good thing at all. I think that's makes it less clear that he'll be the starting left guard if they use him in a versatility role like that. But I don't expect it. So I think it'll be either just left guard for a couple series, or we'll see left guard and maybe center, or maybe left guard and right guard, with him leaving no later than the second quarter at some point, possibly all the way to halftime. So Andrew Voorhees in good shape, and good bright kid, seems to be very comfortable at the podium, very respectful, and defers to a lot of the older players and whatnot. Looks to me like he might be the kind of player that Linderbaum could really value as a line mate that could help run some of the things that Kevin Zeitler used to do. I asked him a question about it. He didn't specifically answer it, but I think that just observing the obvious intelligence there, he well could be the guy who's tapping the center, who's keeping track of other elements of the that Linderbaum would otherwise need to make all the calls for, and could be a guiding hand like Zeitler was, even though he's not directly the one responsible for those calls. That'll do it for Camp Notes today. Thanks for joining me, and we'll have more tomorrow. It'll be a very short practice tomorrow, so I expect that Camp Notes will be, correspondingly short as well. But appreciate you joining us for all this time, and thanks for. Please, if you have a film study short you'd like to work on with me, just hit me up with a DM. I'll get back to you very quickly. And always looking to produce more content here. And we're ramping up. We're about to hit those first preseason game, and much bigger analysis and reviews coming, both in the form of articles and in the form of podcasts after those games. We look forward to talking with you then. Till then, take it easy.